Lovely. All right, so I'm going to begin by sharing my screen here, and we'll get to the PowerPoint slide. Perfect. So, um, first of all, today's webinar is the CELT eLearning Teaching and Active Learning with Teams video conferencing in BlazeVIEW. I know we have a lot of people who were here yesterday, and so we'll be familiar with this beginning spiel, but it's important for the people who weren't to kind of cover things. So my name is Brian Fitzgerald. I'm the training specialist with the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching and the Center for eLearning here at VSU. And this webinar is on active learning, but this is part of a larger three-part webinar series that we are doing to sort of prepare faculty for the transition to Teams video conferencing in BlazeVIEW. So I have a third training that I'm offering tomorrow. It's on student-to-student collaboration using Teams video conferencing. And then on Friday, I'll be offering the same training that I did yesterday, which covers the sort of main pieces of information that you need to know as we transition from Blackboard Collaborate Ultra to Teams video conferencing in BlazeVIEW. And as I just mentioned, all of these recordings and all of the materials and job aids and everything will be hosted on BlazeVIEW 101. So you'll always be able to go in there and find any of the tools or any of the documents that we use as we go through these trainings. Great, so let's go ahead and jump into this webinar here. With that covered, one of my strategies for today is to highlight many of the tools that can be used for active learning within Teams video conferencing. Sorry, this was the learning outcomes for here. I want to jump to this one, the word cloud. Okay. So I want to start by getting your initial reaction to the idea of teaching synchronously online. To do this, we're going to be using the word cloud function in the polling feature, which is native to Teams video conferencing. When I do webinars or even workshops, I regularly like to begin class with a word cloud. I've done this for a while now. I think it really helps give me a sense of where people are and helps me tailor the material to the specific group that I have in front of me at the time. So what's interesting is before preparing myself to use Teams, I always used to use a Web 2.0 tool. Specifically, I would use the free version of Mentimeter to create one slide that you could do as a word cloud and then share that out. So it's been very pleasant for me to discover that this is actually just natively built right into Teams. And so that's been like a nice boost in terms of my transition to Teams, right? So what you see on the screen that I'm sharing right now on the right-hand side is actually a word cloud that I created with Teams. This is kind of what it looks like, the finished product. I use dark mode, so that's why it might look different than if you use the regular sort of white background Teams. And this is just a screenshot of that. But before I actually launch this poll, what I want to do is just quickly take a minute to explain how you can set this kind of thing up in advance when you're working on Teams. So once you set up a Teams meeting, like in the LTI that we showed in yesterday's webinar, and you go into the Teams app on your computer, you'll find that you can right-click on the meeting in your calendar and then edit it. And if you go into the edit the meeting, there are a bunch of options all the way on the top of the thing. So that's what this screenshot on the left of your screen at the top is like a cutout of that where you could join the meeting. But also you'll see like attendance, and you might see like whiteboard and different things like that. So to create a poll in advance, what you'll do is you'll click that plus button that's just to the left of join. And then that's the add a tab button. And when you click that button, a window pops up that you'll see just below that screenshot. And it gives you a bunch of different apps that are sort of built into Teams that you can incorporate. The one that I used for this is just the second one, polls. So you add polls and then it'll end up on your sort of toolbar, just like attendance is right there in that screenshot above. So once I added polls in, you just click on polls and you just say start a new poll, and one of the options is word cloud. It really only took about 15 seconds to set this up once you kind of know the sort of path for that. So fairly straightforward. And what I'm going to do right now is actually launch that poll, and we can get your feedback. So the instructions for this poll are very simple. What I want you to do is write just a word or two that describes your initial reaction to the idea of teaching synchronously online. So that means all in one room at the same time. You don't need to overthink this. Just list a word or two or an emotion or whatever sort of comes to mind. If somebody says, hey, we're going to be teaching synchronously online, what are your first sort of thoughts here? So you should see the poll pop up here. Okay, getting a few responses in. Wonderful. Okay, so we're getting a good mix here. I'm seeing excited, which was like the first one in. Somebody was excited and they jumped right on that. Hooray, right? Glad. So some definitely positive, affective words used to describe this, but also like challenges and management, right? And concerned about engagement. A lot to learn, anxious. These are actually very common things too. I actually would say predominantly I get the sort of there's one like here, let me see. There was one that was opportunity, right? Like opportunity, I think is a very good way to describe the overall thing. Like there's some excitement about the possibility of what you can do with this, but also there's a little bit of anxiety and different things that go along with that, right? And that makes perfect sense to me. And I also think the fact that you all here joined a webinar on Teams like the first day it was available probably means that you're self-selecting into a little bit more confident in the online space, but also perhaps maybe very not confident in needing responses. So we're going to get a little bit of the ends of the spectrum there. The first thing that I want to point out as we do this, and thank you all so much for submitting your responses here. Lots of great stuff. We'll be able to save that in the chat, by the way, here. So beautiful. You know, uh, for the most of us, the vast majority of our experience in academia, at least until like the last few years, either as faculty members or as students, like our entire careers, has taken place using just one modality, right? Like live, face-to-face classrooms in a classroom in the same location. Thank you. I had the synchronously online. Okay, thank you guys for answering, Mitch. I appreciate it. So because of our sort of experience with that particular modality, we are very familiar with it, and we've developed strategies to get the most out of that particular experience, right? And then when the pandemic hit, suddenly we all got kind of thrust into this new environment where for many people, it felt like you weren't teaching embodied students. And that was something that I saw, right? Like you get thinking about blank screens and thinking about disengagement from students. And it felt like, yeah, lecturing to blank screens. And that, I think, left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth about the idea of teaching synchronously online. But the best remedy for that is to take advantage of the tools at your disposal and to incorporate as much active learning as possible, right? And that's why when I saw some of the positive effective responses, it made me really happy because that's how I feel about it. And my expectation is that generally speaking, those responses are coming from people who have some experience teaching online or are sort of technologically inclined in one way or another. Because with experience and familiarity, you discover some of the opportunities that comes from teaching online, right? And that opportunity is both, you know, who the classroom is opened up to, right? I think there's important things about who can access online classes, but also like what you can do in the classroom changes. Some of it becomes more challenging, but other doors are opened up to new things that you can do. And so if you aren't familiar with the tools at your disposal and you aren't comfortable in the space, you're more likely to drop so much of what makes your face-to-face classes so rich. And broadly speaking, that's active learning, right? And so today's webinar is focused on how we can bring active learning into the digital synchronous classroom, which can be something as simple as using the word cloud feature that we started off with, right? You guys all got pulled right into this workshop right from the beginning. So, Mitchell, lovely. I'm glad to hear. Well, this was being able to do like word clouds and pulling is such a useful thing to especially get a classroom started. So thank you for that. I want to turn to thinking about what active learning is, because you can't have a whole webinar on active learning without actually deciding what it is. I'm going to take a note out of Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's playbook. This is the first thing I thought of when I was doing this. But Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, I have a political science background, by the way. He famously set a threshold test for obscenity in one of his decisions as "I know it when I see it." And that reference is for the constitutional law folks out there. But the point here is that instead of asking you guys to take a stab at defining it, I thought what would be more useful is actually to get you guys to think about a collective list of examples of active learning. And the reason I think that's really helpful is that you might get exposed to new ideas that you hadn't sort of come up with before. So we're going to do that using the whiteboard feature. So we're going to jump straight into that. And I know many of you were here yesterday, but not everyone. So I'm going to briefly cover sort of how that works again. First of all, I'm going to talk about how to set it up. And if you were able to sort of follow along what we did in terms of setting up the polling in advance, this should be relatively straightforward because it's virtually the same process, but just a little bit different. So you'll do the same thing. Once you schedule a meeting, you can open up your Teams app on your desktop. You'll right click on the meeting and you can hit edit, right? And then you'll get to the screen where you have the ability to sort of change the times and you can edit the meeting. But at the top of that, you've got these options, right? So you got files, details, scheduling assistant, attendance, etc. Now, I've got that +3, which is like 3 other things that you can edit here. If you click that, you'll see that one of the options in the drop-down menu that appears is meeting whiteboard. Now, it might be behind this +3. It might actually just be listed. It sort of depends on how big your sort of monitor size is when you have it set up, right? But in any case, it should be there as long as there's more than one person scheduled to attend the meeting. A meeting whiteboard will be available as one of the options. So if you click that meeting whiteboard, and then you'll go in and you'll have the ability to create a new whiteboard for this meeting. And then when you do, you'll get a blank screen, right? And that's how most sort of digital synchronous platforms have a whiteboard. It's just this big blank screen that people can throw on. But what's so cool about the Teams whiteboard is you actually have the ability to set this up in advance with the template. So if you saw yesterday, I had these sort of sticky notes that made it really easy for people to just jump in and start adding things. And we're going to do that same thing today. But I wanted to briefly show you what that looks like. So when I went in to set up the whiteboard, I opened up the tab that's on the left-hand side by clicking the plus button. You'll see that. And then all these different things appeared. And I went in and found templates, and I found templates that sort of work for what we're doing here. So there's a template in there that's called Brainstorm that we're going to be going to in a minute. And I've got one for exit tickets and different things like that. So you can kind of get started with existing things or build it out in advance. Or you can load in an image if you make something in like Canva or PowerPoint or something like that and save it as an image. You can load those images and have students jump in and annotate and add shapes and reactions and all kinds of different fun, exciting things there. Once you open up, Mitch, once you open up click on whiteboard from this sort of meeting edit thing, and you can just say create a new whiteboard and you'll be able to go in there and edit it. So what's interesting about whiteboards is they live separately from the meetings themselves a little bit. So even after the meeting, students can go in later and continue to collaborate with it. You can also create multiple whiteboards. Like today, we're going to be using 2. So I have 2 different things that are pre-set up. And when I go into the first whiteboard, I'll just pick the right one. And then later, we'll go in and use another one. Is there a way to set up Teams so you get all the same tools when you create a meeting rather than adding them for each new meeting? So in terms of that's a great question, Paul. I'm not 100% sure. You might have to add the polling feature for each new one. The whiteboard is automatically, that's a default as long as there's 2 people in the thing. Oh, Sheila's here. Wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. By the way, Sheila is our sort of IT specialist that can help with a lot of the technical questions. And so thank you so much for showing. So apparently there is a way to set it up so that that's a default setting. Sheila, I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that that's one of the things that she covers in her trainings on it too. And we can you can reach out to Sheila and she would be more than happy to help you in that regard. Now the next slide before we actually launch this whiteboard is actually how to use the whiteboard, because what's interesting about whiteboard is it's an infinite space, which means that you can continue to add new pieces of information on the outskirts of whatever has existed indefinitely. But what that does is it means that sometimes the perspective can get skewed, and each individual person has their own controls over their perspective. So you'll want to use either the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out, or there's going to be options in the bottom right-hand corner that allow you to zoom out, zoom in, or this button all the way on the right that's like two arrows pointing out that automatically fits to the screen, whatever exists on the whiteboard. So cutting out as much blank space as you can. And then once we get into this whiteboard, you're going to see I've got these sort of sticky notes, post-its written. If you double click on that, you'll be able to write your response to the question. And then you've got the ability to kind of hover over the bottom left-hand corner and like things that you've seen before. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to share this whiteboard, and what I want you to do is go in and just write examples of active learning. This can be sort of broad categories like a think, pair, share, or it can be something specific that you do in your class. I'm just looking for sort of broad ideas of different opportunities for active learning. So let me share the whiteboard here. Make sure I have the right one shared. Perfect. So everybody should be seeing the whiteboard now, correct? If somebody can give me a thumbs up reaction, that would be lovely. Yes, awesome. Okay, so let's take a few minutes here and go ahead and double click on any of these things to start just writing examples. The colors don't mean anything, it was just to help distinguish. But I'll go ahead and get us started with one over here. I can say this, right? This is an example of active learning. I'm pulling you all into the activities for this workshop. So I'll take the first credit for this one, but I'm gonna take a sip of water while you guys all start adding your ideas here. Thank you to those of you who are helping answer Byungwei's question here. Okay, I'm starting to see some wonderful answers. So Nicole wrote, students leading discussions. Absolutely, student-led discussions is definitely going to be an active engagement type thing. Interacting with each other, certainly. Precognitive prompts, very specific. I love it. Writing reflections, group work, excellent. These are all wonderful examples. Discussion, engagement. Think, pair, share. I did jump on that one. Apologies for stealing that from you, but that's a classic. Wonderful. Just working problems, Jennifer. Absolutely. Creating products, jigsaw with data figures that students separately analyze and interpret. I love that. I don't see who wrote that. I think somebody just did a comment box instead of that. So I'm not sure who that was, but I do love to use a jigsaw myself. Definitely when I'm doing, especially live workshops. So we'll think about how some of these things translate a little bit later. Sharing completed work. I think let's see if we can move that one back down. Creating products, stop, start, continue. Wonderful. Okay. And I see some people, yeah, we've got a few more, so let's give it another minute or so. See a few more people writing. Drawing on the whiteboard, sticky notes. Yep, you can do that in person too. Have students run up to the whiteboard. I love that. Doing self-reflections, that's huge. Absolutely. I don't know why this one keeps bumping up here. We'll pull it back down. Okay, so a lot of really great stuff here. Thank you all so much for engaging and jumping in on that. Want to take a quick moment because people who are watching this webinar might be a little bit confused. The whiteboard doesn't sort of show up in the recording, so I'm going to upload a PNG of this whiteboard into just beneath the webinar that you can open up while you're watching this to see what everybody's writing here. Okay, So as far as definitions go for active learning, I know some people are going to actually want the definition. I'm partial to Michael Prince's, and I'm going to actually, let me copy and paste. I'll put it in the chat right now. Copy. Here is Michael Prince's definition. So active learning is generally defined as any instructional method that engages students in the learning process. In short, active learning requires students to do meaningful learning activities and think about what they're doing. And I think this is a good definition because it doesn't try to be specific. And really, when you think about active learning, it sort of is a broad umbrella category for all the kinds of things that you can do in the classroom that students are participating in, right? So if you're not kind of sage on the stage where you're just lecturing and they're taking notes and just not even really thinking deeply about the material, you've got some level of active learning there, right? And so we've got these fun strategies like stop, start, continue, or having sort of very carefully thought out self-reflections, and that's wonderful. But also, you know, it doesn't have to be as structured. We just need students to be a part of it, right? Okay, so that's the whiteboard feature. That's the first time we've used it today. And along with the whiteboard and the polling feature, we've now used two sort of active learning strategies, and we're 20 minutes into this webinar. So feeling pretty good about that right now. I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and we're going to go back to the slide deck here in a second. So thank you all so much for your contributions to this whiteboard. Let's return now to the slides. And I want to take a minute to actually talk about why active learning is important, right? And I think a lot of people understand it intuitively, but there's actually really good sort of pedagogical evidence about some of the benefits of incorporating more active learning into your classroom, right? So the first is that it allows instructors to gauge student learning. That's because active learning allows you to sort of easily evaluate the level that your students are at, and especially in terms of understanding new concepts or topics, right? So if there's some misunderstanding about a topic, you have the ability to sort of correct it quickly, right when it presents itself. And this can help you test students' comprehension, perhaps without using these sort of high stakes tests or quizzes or different things like that. And finally, you can also assess the efficacy of your lesson plans so that you can make adjustments. Perhaps you need to spend a few more minutes on topic A and a few fewer on topic B because you were seeing how well people were understanding it. Formative feedback, exactly, Jamie, thank you. Active learning also requires student participation, right? And this is really important in the online space. And this is one of the things that you saw from the word cloud right at the beginning is people thinking about engagement, thinking about, you know, blank screens and sort of not being a part of it. Is when you have these sort of active learning things, you're pulling students back into the classroom. And that's especially important in the online space where it's very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to kind of lose your focus, right? And that's something that a lot of people complained about during the pandemic. And also, I think it helps pull in students who might be a little bit more shy or reserved, right? It gets them participating. And those are students that can be a hard time spotting where they're at in terms of their level of comprehension of topics. So pulling everybody into the classroom gives you a better sense of where everyone is rather than the people who sort of naturally are the leaders of your just sort of discussions when you have things. Active learning also increases cognitive retention. So there's research that shows that when you're actively engaging with the material, you have more retention. And that is the sort of ability to recall learned information over a longer period of time. So even if you can learn something through sort of just taking notes on a lecture versus actively engaging in it, you might learn it both ways, but you'll remember that information for longer if you were sort of actively engaged in the process of learning it. A major component of active learning is that it provides opportunities for students to receive feedback and reflect on the material. So this ties in really closely with the first thing that we were showing, but it gives you that sort of formative feedback right away that lets students sort of adapt how much they need to be sort of lets them learn where they're struggling too. So it's in addition to you finding out where there's sort of pockets of where students need a little help, it also lets them know where they need a little bit of help themselves. And finally, it can help you build connections between faculty and students and among students themselves, right? So it encourages collaboration and communication, which can help foster communication or connections for everybody. Okay, wonderful. So now, will students on phones automatically see the whiteboard when we share it, or do they need to be able to locate it? So that's a great question, Penelope. I think it should show up on their phone. I'm not sure exactly how well they'll be able to use the interface on such a small screen. It should show up, right? Because it's part of the same sort of interface there. So that's maybe something I'll need to play around with a little bit more in terms of seeing like how well that works on a phone or an iPad or different kinds of devices. So I'm going to make a note of that because I'm not 100% sure, but I imagine because it's just like it's the same meeting space, but I'm not sure how well the sort of user interface is. Paul asked, is there a way to use the polling as a quiz that the scores can be added to the gradebook in BlazeVIEW? Paul, not directly. So you can do like a quiz thing where it actually tracks who's scoring things or like how students are doing, right? Or like attention check type things, like if you're paying attention. But it won't, it doesn't feed into the gradebook in BlazeVIEW. So correct, Jamie. So yeah, it doesn't speak to the gradebook. You'll have to, if you want to do that, you'll have that information, but you'd have to go in and sort of manually enter it into the gradebook, if that makes sense. Great questions. Are there any other questions before we jump into the next section? I love it. Thank you for bringing your questions here. The poll by default is anonymous. But you can have it track who's submitting different answers. So that's a setting that you can set. I remember seeing that. Sheila can confirm that, I think, but I'm fairly confident that by default it's anonymous, but you have the ability to set it to track that. And then Elvin said, I've taught synchronously during COVID. Using Teams on the phone is not effective at all. Tablets are fine, but phones are not good. It's just really tough to kind of, especially if you're trying to do active learning with a small screen, it can be definitely a challenge there. I think if you're just watching a recording or a video, it can be fine. But when you're really trying to pull, like the whole point of this, right, is to how to incorporate active learning. And I think Elvin's point is well taken, that it's going to be difficult to kind of engage with a small device like that. Okay, lovely. Thank you so much for your questions. And yeah, that's a good point, Jamie. That's true for any sort of any program. That's not team specific. That's just going to be a universal thing that's hard to be sort of supremely engaged with a small phone. If you write the solution on the whiteboard, will it be recorded? The whiteboard is a living document that you can access before, during, and after a meeting. I also have the ability to, for example, go in and lock it as the sort of administrator. I can stop it from continuing to be edited. So if you want to just pause a moment in time at what we landed on during this webinar, then I can go in and lock it right now. If you want to create it in such a way that students can continue to access it later and use it as a brainstorming thing, then you can leave it open and they'll be able to access it as well. Wonderful questions. Okay, let's turn to the next activity. And here we're going to be using breakout groups and converting pause teaching strategies to online. So one of the things that I found when talking to faculty about teaching online is that we tend to overcomplicate things in our head. And so one of the strategies that I've developed is to ask faculty to design the class without regard to the modality in which it's being taught, right? And this is a really subtle shift. It goes from how do I teach this online class to how do I teach this class online, right? But this sort of subtle shift can have a tremendous impact on your design. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But basically, this is applying the concept of backwards design to online classes. And I think it's really, I mean, this is a good pedagogical practice. Anytime you're designing a class for any modality is to start with the end in mind, right? But I think it's especially important when you're teaching online because so often we get caught up in like, what can I do rather than what do I want to get done? And this isn't universally true, but generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, I think that when you know your learning outcomes and you know what activities you want to do, you can find a way to do it online, right? There's going to be some kind of mechanism to allow you to do that, but don't start thinking about, well, how can I use these tools? Think about, what do I want to get done, and then find what tools are going to help you accomplish that, right? And that mindset shift can actually go a long way when you're helping to design an online class. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sharing in the chat a document. This is pause teaching strategies. Let me get that in here. Probably have to do it in this chat. Okay, so that should be in the chat now. You'll be able to access it here. Pause teaching strategies is something that James Lang talks about in Small Teaching Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning. And it's expanded upon and really fleshed out in Gail Taylor Rice's Hitting Pause, 65 Lecture Breaks to Refresh and Reinforce Learning. Pause teaching is active learning, but like little bite-sized chunks, right? That's how I think about it. Now, many of you are going to be familiar with some of these strategies, either through previous workshops you've attended. I know we've had faculty learning communities who've talked about this and worked on incorporating pause teaching strategies, or independently through your own research or training, right? And that's wonderful. I want you to take all of that knowledge and all of that experience that you have, and you're going to bring that to bear in your conversations with colleagues once I split you out to breakout rooms here in a second. But if you have access to this, document now, which you should be able to see in the chat, and you open it up, what you'll see is that these strategies are organized into 3 different categories. We've got starting pauses, mid pauses, and closing pauses. And in a second, when I put you into the breakout rooms, what you'll see is that your individual rooms have been labeled starting pauses, mid pauses, or closing pauses. You'll be able to find that like on the top of your window. Right now, if you look at this window where you're watching the webinar, it says CELT eLearning, Teaching and Active Learning with Teams Video Conferencing. Well, I've preset these breakout rooms, and I can show how I did that here now with this slide. And I labeled them starting pauses, mid pauses, and closing pauses. So you'll be in one of these breakout rooms, and you'll know which of these categories of different pauses you should be looking through for the activity. There's also instructions in there that I'll go over briefly before I put you out. But as with the other sort of examples of active learning, I want to take a brief second to show you how I set this up in advance. And by now, this shouldn't come as a big surprise. It's virtually the same as the last 2 things, right? Which is you schedule a meeting, you open up the Teams app, and then you go and you right click on the meeting that was scheduled, you click edit, and then you'll have this option to click breakout rooms as long as there's more than one person. So this is a default one, just like the whiteboard. It might be behind the like +6 or +3 or whatever you have, but you'll see in this sort of like top left screenshot that I've got breakout rooms as one of the options. Now, if you click on that, you'll get this sort of screenshot that's below it on the left-hand side, the bottom left, where it just says create rooms because there aren't any rooms created. So you click create rooms. You can tell it how many rooms you want to create. In this case, I have 3 because I have this sort of opening pauses, starting pauses, mid pauses, and closing pauses. You'll click add rooms, and then you can actually assign participants to those rooms in advance if you'd like. So you can, it's a little bit tough to see here, but there's a button on this screenshot on the bottom right of the slide. Behind the pop-up window where you can see it actually says assign participants, you'll just click that button, and then you have 2 options. You can click automatically or manually. Now, automatically will just randomly divide the number of people that were invited into the breakout rooms, or manually you can pick and choose if you have sort of group sets that are specific that you want people working together on. Because I didn't know exactly who all was going to be showing up today, I wanted the rooms to be divided equally. I just created the rooms, but I didn't divide them. So I'll be able to do that very quickly by just selecting automatically right before I send you all into your breakout rooms here in a minute. But so I'm going to do that now, actually.
Wait, Brian, can you give us the instructions of what we're doing?
That's
again,
a great, yeah,
please?
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so
yeah, okay.
Let me stop sharing this, and I'm going to share the actual handout that you should all be able to look at right now. Okay, so now I'm sharing this document. This is the one that I put in the chat here. And if you scroll down, you'll see that there's the starting pauses, the mid pauses, and the closing pauses, right? And so what you're gonna do is individually, you'll sort of read through these items, take 5 or 6 minutes to read through, and then figure out how you could incorporate one of these into one of your classes, right? And specifically now at this point, I want you to think about teaching it online. So even if you aren't currently teaching online, just imagine some class that you teach as if you had to teach this synchronously online. How would you go about incorporating one of these pause teaching strategies there? What's important for this exercise is that you're as specific as possible, right? So think about which specific class you're teaching, right? What topic that you're teaching from within that class where this would be useful, and then what kind of tool you might need to use. So if you need to use the breakout groups or the polling feature or screen sharing or some Web 2.0 tool like Kahoot or something like that, be as specific as possible as you sort of think through how you would incorporate one of these activities into your classes. And then um, yeah, so the instructions, you should be able to see this on the handout that you have access to, but I'll be able to, what I'll do is once I send you out into breakout rooms, I can create an announcement that has it and it should appear in the chat for you there as well. So we'll have a backup there, but also you can always read this highlighted portion in the document that I shared and then use those instructions. So after those 5 to 6 minutes, you'll take another 8 or 9 minutes to actually discuss this out with the other people in your group. So talk about which strategy you picked, why you picked that strategy, and how you would implement it. But then there's a couple of questions specifically, right? So I really want you to focus on why you chose that specific strategy. And as you were looking through the other list of strategies that were available in your group, were any of them, did you think any of them would be particularly challenging in the online setting, and why? Like, was there any that you kind of avoided in particular, right? So we can start to think about where we're gravitating to in terms of which of these strategies and where we might be struggling. And what's interesting is if you find that maybe one that didn't feel intuitive for you, someone else might have a great strategy for how you can implement that yourself. Okay, are there any other questions? Looking good, it looks like. Okay. Right now, it appears I have to do this manually, so give me just 1 second here. All right, so I've got you all assigned to groups. I'm gonna go ahead and open those up. You had to download it to keep it open. Okay, so I'll definitely send an announcement into all the chats to make sure that you have those instructions. But you might want to download that as well, especially once we send it into groups. Okay, and I'll pop into all the rooms. So if you have any sort of technical difficulties, we'll make sure that we get that resolved. But broadly speaking, read through whatever category you're in. And this is a really good, before I actually send you out, this is a really important sort of learning opportunity, is like when you're incorporating new technologies, there's going to be a little bit of like, bumps in the road, like while you're trying to do it, or these questions that you're like, I'm not 100% sure, right? And it's helpful to recognize that your students have those same questions, right? And they're going to be wondering like, well, how do I do this and how do I do that? And so it's really nice to sort of give a little bit of grace, and then also to explain as well as you can in advance how to do things. That's all going to be really sort of helpful both for you and for your students in terms of minimizing sort of challenges as we do this. So I'm going to send you into your rooms now. I'm going to send an announcement with the instructions, but you also have them on this document. And in about 5 or 6 minutes, go ahead and start sharing amongst yourself what your sort of conclusions are. And then in about 15 minutes, I'm going to pull everyone back in and we'll debrief. So that should happen with a few minutes left to go in this webinar. Okay. I hope I didn't cut anybody off mid-sentence there.
You did.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It happens. Let's see. I think we've got everybody back in the main room now. Wonderful. So I popped into all your rooms, and I was going to close them a few minutes earlier, actually, so that we could kind of debrief, but every single room had such important and interesting conversations happening in it, and I didn't want to kind of pull you away. Penelope, great question. I just closed the rooms. So I was using, there's like an announcement feature to send announcements during the thing. And then I don't know if as presenters, if you can see it right now, but on the top where there's like the chat and different things, there's like a rooms button. So I click that, and then I've got the rooms that I had set up, which I can open and close at leisure, and it automatically pulls people in and out of the rooms. You can actually, this is another setting that you can do. You can set it so that people have to join or leave the room to do it. But by default, it just pulls people in and out as the controller. And we're going to talk a little bit more about doing breakouts, actually quite a bit more about doing breakout rooms in the workshop tomorrow, the webinar tomorrow. So I know many of you guys have been signed up for all of them. So we're going to go into a little bit more depth there, but I want to just kind of take a quick minute here before we wrap up to recap like what we were able to accomplish today, which was for what 57 minutes now into this webinar, and we look at the sort of opportunities for active learning that we've incorporated today. We used the polling feature, right, the word cloud, to start things off. We had the whiteboard featuring brainstorm, right? We used our chats and microphones to communicate with one another. We had file sharing, right? That's a wonderful sort of ability in Teams to sort of quickly and easily share files. Screen sharing, like I'm doing right now. The breakout rooms for sort of smaller group discussions were available. And then what we're about to do right now is actually turn to an exit ticket. So for those of you who are in my closing pauses strategy, you know that using exit tickets is one of our sort of active learning strategies there. And it's one that I like to end my workshops and webinars with. So, and I was very pleased to find that normally I'd done this in the chat before, where I had people answer a question and post it in the chat, but we can do a whiteboard, and there's literally a template for doing this exactly. So I'm going to share that with you right now, and this is going to be our sort of closing ticket. So there's going to be questions. Let me just share it, and then we'll be able to see here in just a second. So this is probably going to be the whiteboard we were using earlier, but I have the ability to go in and change it. All right, so you should be seeing a new whiteboard here, and this is a sort of exit ticket opportunity. So you can go in one of three different categories. The orange ones are things you learned today. The blue is things that you found interesting, and then green is things that I still have questions about. And what's lovely about using this exit ticket approach is that I now have this as a document that I can sort of tailor future iterations of this webinar to. And for things specifically that you put in things I still have questions about, I can reach out to you individually or collectively if it seems like the kind of thing that would be helpful for everybody. So this is going to wrap it up for today. Do make sure that you complete this exit ticket before you go, but this is our final activity. So once you've got your things in there, I'll be collecting these and then be able to respond to you individually. But as you're sort of filling these out, I just want to thank you again for attending. I know that we just wrapped up the semester, and so you guys are all, I'm sure, still reeling from the grades deadline. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. Let me take a look at some of the things that we're putting here. I'm not sure what was said in the chat that Sheila's responding to. Oh, I think that was from much earlier, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sheila, for looking into that. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got. So using the whiteboard, lots of whiteboard things. Kathy that was one of the pause teaching strategies. I loved it. I love it. Polling whiteboards, breakout rooms. Paul's talking about using the polling tool for his classes. Let's see. Jamie Lando talking about all the different kinds of interactive tools available here. Let me take a look at what we still need to know. The difference between Teams channels and meetings. That's a great question, Fleming. That's going to be a thing where Sheila covers that in one of her trainings on sort of channels, meeting. I forget the exact name of it, but she's got a training that's dedicated to that sort of very specific thing, which I will be happy to point you to once it's scheduled in the fall. I know that she'll be offering all of her Teams-based trainings in the fall. So we'll definitely make sure that you're aware of when that is, when it gets scheduled. Okay. How to use those Teams features yourself. Yeah, I mean, there's no better practice than getting in. So thank you all so much. If you have any more, I want to encourage you to continue to share them in here until you've gotten all your thoughts out. This is going to help me guide how we're sort of preparing faculty for this. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to put things in here. But I also want to be mindful of time, and we have reached time today. Thank you, Mitchell. So much appreciated to everybody. Once you've completed what you have to say, then by all means, enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you who will be joining me tomorrow, I look forward to it. And thank you all so much. So many thank yous. I appreciate it. I'll be here, Jamie. Yeah, if anybody has specific questions, I can hang out for a little bit afterwards, and maybe Sheila can too. I don't know if she has a few minutes. And between the two of us, we might be able to tag team if somebody has specific questions. If not, then I certainly have the ability. Thank you, Elvin. I appreciate it.
Brian, may I say something real quick?
Sure.
Are any of you all teaching this summer online using Teams?
I'm teaching this summer online, but I'm not sure I'll use Teams.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I'm teaching. I will probably try it. I'm not afraid to do it.
Okay. Great. I was just I'm about to send out notice, but since I have your attention anyway, for the class teams for summer, we do have a delay in getting the data pulled in. So there will be a little delay in your class teams being ready, but it's coming soon. But we want to try to get that out to you as quickly as we can so you have time to prep for it.
Is Teams being integrated into GoView as well?
That's a great question, Fleming. It isn't currently, but our sort of my colleagues in eLearning are working with the eCore folks to sort of figure out just the fact that it includes a bunch of different universities.
Let me go ahead and answer that. Hey, Fleming, I'm literally meeting with Ophelia tomorrow about this, so we'll circle back with all the faculty who are teaching GoView. The integration doesn't work the same, so we're kind of trying to figure out what to do about that. We got some good options.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. This semester I had one face-to-face class, 3 classes in BlazeVIEW, and 1 in GoView.
Mm-hmm.
And then this summer I have 2 in GoView.
Mm-hmm.
And possibly 1 in BlazeVIEW. It's we're all over the place.
I know. And you can imagine how much that is challenging for us too, right? On the end, as you know.
Yeah,
so yeah,
my head is spinning just trying to keep up with which
these
class
trainings
is where.
Exactly. So these trainings are only about BlazeVIEW at the moment, and we're kind of figuring out the next steps for the GoView classes. So thank you for your patience.
I see a lot of people still hanging out. So are there any other questions that I can help answer while you guys are here?
Hey, I had a quick one. I typed it in, but I figured it'd be just a quick, easy answer. Are y'all generating a job aid for the different tools that you demonstrated today?
So we have the job aid.
Somewhere?
The thing about some of the stuff that we have today, actually, I'll send this out in an email, but basically Microsoft produces a lot of these. So they're not specific, like setting up the whiteboard or something like that is not specific to BlazeVIEW. And so when you can actually share what Microsoft is doing, I have it, I can pull it up and see if I can grab that right now, at least for the breakout rooms. I know I have that one available handy. And if not, I'll definitely send it all out in the follow-up email. But with Microsoft stuff, they automatically update it when they sort of roll out new things or if something changes. So anything that's sort of very just Microsoft specific, we tend to just farm out to them, where we have the job aids. I think you were in yesterday, so you got the job aids that about sort of setting up the Teams integration, right?
Yeah, so I had those three that were available yesterday, and so they're having just kind of a little quick summary of each of the tools, or or the links to the Microsoft site would be a time saver.
Absolutely. It looks like Sheila just posted that into the chat. This is the IT's page where they've got essentially all of these links out. So hopefully that will be able to get you sort of, it's their own sort of repository of links out to the sort of Microsoft things. Is that correct, Sheila? I don't want to speak for you.
So one thing I want to jump in, Paul, because Fleming was asking this in our small group, to think about it this way, and I think, Brian, we're going to have to do this more in our webinars. Microsoft has all these apps and all these tools, Paul, that work anywhere you use a video conference in Teams, right? Like when we sign into a Senate meeting or a Council of Department Heads meeting on Teams. And so they're always going to have on their websites, like Sheila has on her website, how to use all these little teeny little kind of apps and features. And that's why Sheila does all these great trainings. What eLearning has had to create on our end are the job aids and for how to use it in BlazeVIEW, like the integration part of BlazeVIEW, like you learned yesterday, and then how to pedagogically leverage these tools, not just for a meeting, but pedagogically. So does that help make sense a little bit of why things might be in two different places?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, and as you say that, it reminds me that y'all covered some of that yesterday about how y'all do the BlazeView specific things and you let IT do the Teams things. So
yeah,
so
and we
sort
know
of
it's
division of labor.
Yeah, exactly. And we knew when this integration happened that it would be a collaborative effort between us and IT. So yeah, so we're gonna kind of, like Brian, we're gonna have to keep just linking to Sheila's website and the Microsoft tools, even while we have our pedagogical and BlazeView side of things.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Yep.
Were there any other questions while you have us here?
The list of apps is impressive. I'm just exploring those.
I've only
begun to I don't know if you can see me or not, but you can see I've also explored the backgrounds.
Yeah, I noticed that a couple of times actually during the meeting. Yeah, there's way too many apps for any one person to be an expert on all of them. So I tried to highlight a few things that were useful. The polling one I think is like the sort of automatic, but like OneNote, you can sort of integrate OneNote sort of easily as well. So Excel documents, like you can have live collaborative editing of Excel documents, which you might not want to do with a class, but certainly with like a team, like your department, maybe with a class. It depends on what class you're teaching. Certainly,
math classes.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why it was like
statistics classes. Yeah. We were talking about that in our breakout group.
Yeah.
So that's how to do what we were discussing in our breakout group.
Yeah, the same way that you can create a collaborative Word document, you can create a collaborative Excel document, and people can start manipulating the data. What's actually really cool is you can have different views. So if somebody filters the data a certain way, it doesn't change the view that other people are looking at it. So like everyone can kind of be working in it at the same time. If you have definitely like a statistics class or something along those lines. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then, thanks again so much for coming. And Sheila, I really appreciate your support and joining these and being able to answer questions and share resources in the chat. And also just for being a wonderful colleague who helped assist me as I prepared these things. So thank you again for that. But yeah, feel free to reach out if anything comes up. Otherwise, as I said before, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Cheers, Fleming. Appreciate you coming by.